Well, this content has been in the works now for the better part of a year, but I am finally done. Or at least I've given up waiting for more B850 motherboards to arrive, so we've capped out at 47 unique motherboards. There is a lot to get through, so I think we should best get started. But actually, before we do, there's a quick thing that we need to do. I'm pointing right now, so...
This portion of the video has been sponsored by MSI QD-OLED gaming monitors. Whether you're after a blazing fast 500Hz display or something with a stunning 4K 240Hz panel, MSI has got you covered with an excellent QD-OLED monitor. They've got everything from 27-inch to 49-inch formats, both flat and curved, offering perfect blacks, pixel level control, infinite contrast, fantastic accuracy, and up to Display HDR True Black 500 certification. These vivid displays truly look excellent for immersive HDR gaming while still offering crystal clear motion clarity and zero ghosting. MSI's lineup includes flagship future-proof features such as up to DisplayPort 2.1a connectivity and USB-C with power delivery. To learn more and grab an MSI QD-OLED monitor today, check the links in the description below.
Okay, so as I said, there are 47 motherboards in total, at least 47 unique motherboards. We have about 50-something boards because we have some of the Wi-Fi and then non-Wi-Fi versions of particular models. But anyway, it's 47 motherboards. And we have already looked closely at 23 of them in what would be part one of this series, where we focused on the sub $200 US models, or at least the models we had available at the time that cost $200 US or less. Now, this second part includes 24 more B850 motherboards, most of which are priced over $200 US, though there are some cheaper models that have since arrived, so I'm going to include those boards as well. So, let's get into it. Okay, so first up, we're going to start with the Asrock boards, but please note the bulk of the Asrock range was covered in part 1, as 11 of their boards came in at under $200 US. In fact, Asrock has just a single B850 motherboard priced over $200 US, which is their ATX version of the Steel Legend, but recently they released the B850 Challenger Wi-Fi, but that model is priced under $200 US. Though availability is still pretty much non-existent, so we don't know the exact price yet. Anyway, we didn't have the Challenger previously, so I've included it now in part 2, and this model is available in either black or white, and the white version is, I believe, Asrock's first all-white motherboard, much like Gigabyte's Ice boards. As for features, it's an interesting board with just two M.2 slots, leaving a huge amount of almost empty space between the primary and secondary PCIe x16 slots. Asrock has included two PCIe x1 slots, so if you wanted to add in more M.2 slots you could, and that means when compared to the Steel Legend or Aorus, for example, it's a little more flexible in that regard. You're also getting Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5 Gigabit Ethernet as standard, along with a possible 11 USB 3.2 ports. The I/O panel does feature half a dozen USB 3.2 ports, along with 4 USB 2.0 ports, and I should mention that there is a single USB Type-C. Finally, you're getting a dozen 50A power stages for the V-Core, so that should be plenty of power delivery. Now, the Steel Legend Wi-Fi is Asrock's flagship B850 motherboard, and it costs $210 US, which seems pretty reasonable. For that money, you're getting 14 80A power stages for the V-Core VRM on an 8-layer PCB, 2 PCIe x16 slots, a total of 4 M.2 slots, a dozen USB 3.2 ports, and 8 USB 2.0 ports, along with Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5 Gigabit LAN. When compared to the cheaper Micro ATX version, the I/O configuration is very similar, though you are getting 3 extra USB 3.2 ports, one of which is a Type-C. So overall, the Steel Legend is a fine motherboard, though it's not radically different from the cheaper ATX models, such as the Live Mixer, for example. Okay, so time to go over the Asus motherboards. We have quite a few here, as we could only find 2 Asus B850 motherboards that were priced below $200 US for our previous test, which was part 1. That said, the B850 Max Gaming Wi-Fi W has now dropped to $180 US, but the majority of the range is still priced over $200 US. Anyway, the B850 Max Gaming Wi-Fi W features a very basic VRM using discrete MOSFETs, similar to the Prime B850 Plus Wi-Fi. And when compared to that board, you are also getting many of the same features on a 6-layer PCB. There's the same 4 PCIe x16 slots, which is nice, the same 3 M.2 slots, and even the USB configuration is nearly identical with 8 USB 3.2 ports and 9 USB 2.0 ports, along with Wi-Fi 6E and 2.5 gigabit LAN. So it is quite a well-equipped motherboard, though the power delivery isn't anything special at this price point. But of course I am interested to see how it performs. Jumping up to $210 US, we have the tough gaming B850M Plus Wi-Fi, and this is the first really good B850 motherboard from Asus in my opinion. For power delivery, there's 14 80-amp power stages for the V-Core on an 8-layer PCB. Oddly though, there is just a single PCIe x16 slot, though Asus has included a PCIe x1 slot as well. Thankfully, they have managed to squeeze in a trio of M.2 slots and 4 SATA ports. Then for connectivity, the board supports a grand total of 10 USB 3.2 ports and half a dozen USB 2.0 ports, along with Wi-Fi 6E and 2.5 gigabit LAN. The tough gaming B850M Plus Wi-Fi is very similar to Gigabyte's B850M Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 6E Ice, though this Asus version does cost $30 more. So a bit of Asus tax there, though to be fair, their board does have a slightly higher spec VRM. Then for $10 more, Asus offers an ATX version of the tough gaming, which keeps the same 14 80-amp power stages for the V-Core on an 8-layer PCB. There is a second PCIe x16 slot now, though everything else remains pretty much the same. In fact, the tough gaming B850 Plus Wi-Fi is very similar to Asrock's Steel Legend, though it does cost $10 more. A small premium, and Asus has the bonus of, well, not having a history of killing X3D processors, so the extra investment's probably worth it there. Now, the big guns from Asus start at $230 US, and here we find the ROG Strix B850A gaming Wi-Fi, a very impressive looking white motherboard, though it's not an all-white design, as most of the plastic connectors are still black. Still, either way, it's a good looking board, and we find the same 14 80-amp power stages on an 8-layer PCB as we did on the tough gaming models. In fact, when compared to the ATX version of the tough gaming, the ROG Strix B850A gaming Wi-Fi is remarkably similar in terms of features. But then it does only cost $10 more, so I guess that makes sense. Pretty heavy market segmentation, but that's par for the course with motherboard makers. You're really only getting an extra M.2 slot, though 2 less SATA ports with everything else being much the same. I suppose the major upgrades here have been made to the board itself, so stuff like the heatsinks, there are more of them and they're typically a bit bigger, while the primary M.2 heatsink features a tool-free design, so that's a nice little upgrade. Then jumping up another $15 to $20 US, we'll find you the ROG Strix B850F gaming Wi-Fi, a black board with a few notable upgrades. The VRM has been extended to 16 80-amp power stages, and that's again for the V-Core portion, on an 8-layer PCB. There's still 4 M.2 slots, but 2 of them are now PCIe 5.0 compliant, and the I/O panel is much the same, with the only change here being an additional 2 USB 2.0 ports. Other than that, it is basically a black version of the B850A. Then we have the ROG Strix B850E gaming Wi-Fi, which is a crazy overkill B850 board, and it doesn't really seem to make all that much sense, it has to be said. And that's because at this point you'd be much better off buying an X870E motherboard. But anyway, it comes with 16 90-amp power stages for the V-Core, which is extreme overkill. There's 5 M.2 slots, 2 of which are PCIe 5.0 compliant, and USB 4 is also on offer, though there is just a single port. Also included is Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN, so it's a seriously impressive board, but it's also seriously, or rather stupidly priced. That's because pricing in the US at the time of making this video was $500, which again makes no sense, and I think this is due to limited availability, or at least I hope it is. Here in Australia, availability does appear to be much better, but even so, the board still costs 600 Australian dollars, which makes it the most expensive B850 motherboard in our market. It's around 20% more costly than the Strix Mini ITX board, so that would make it at least $420 US. Yikes. Speaking of the Strix Mini ITX board, we also have the ROG Strix B850i gaming Wi-Fi on hand, and this model currently costs $350 US, so it's a very small, very expensive B850 motherboard. In terms of features though, it is pretty well stacked. The V-Core VRM uses 10 90-amp power stages on a 10-layer PCB. Of course, there is just a single PCIe x16 slot, but you also get 2 M.2 slots, which is decent, though at this point I would have expected at least 3. There's also just 2 SATA ports, 8 USB 3.2 ports, 4 USB 2.0 ports, Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5 gigabit LAN. There's also just 6 USB 3.2 ports on the I/O, with 2 USB 2.0 ports, so I have to say, for the money, this mini ITX board seems a little bit underwhelming. Now, most of the Gigabyte boards were featured in Part 1, as the bulk of their range is priced at or below $200 US. However, one board that didn't make the cut was the Gigabyte B850 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7 Ice, though at the time of making this video, it could be had temporarily for $200 US, though it does normally sell for around $240 US, and I suspect that's where it'll be by the time you watch this video, providing you watch the video shortly after it goes live. Anyway, this is a great looking board that is very well equipped, packing 14 60A power stages of the V-Core VRM, 3 PCIe x 16 slots, 3 M.2 slots, 11 USB 3.2 ports, and 8 USB 2.0 ports, along with Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5 gigabit LAN. It's a very solid offering for the money, so I'm keen to see how it performs. Gigabyte also offers a mini ITX B850 motherboard, though their model is also quite pricey at $310 US. For power delivery, they've gone with 8 80A power stages, which should be ample, and like the Asus board, it's built on a 10-layer PCB. There's also 2 M.2 slots and 2 SATA ports, along with 8 USB 3.2 and 4 USB 2.0 ports. Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5 gigabit LAN is also included, though the I/O configuration is even weaker than the Asus model, with just 5 USB 3.2 ports and 2 USB 2.0 ports. It's pretty barren, especially for the price. Pricing for the Asus ROG Strix B850E gaming Wi-Fi was stupid, and while the Gigabyte B850 AI top is another crazy high-end board using a B-series chipset, it's a lot less stupid in my opinion. Firstly, it costs just $320 US. I know, just $320 US, but it ends up, I think, being a bit of a bargain once you consider the feature set. Firstly, the VRM is insane. There are 16 110A power stages just for the V-Core. Obviously, that's unnecessary. It's extreme overkill, but I guess sure, we'll take it. And we'll take it because you're also getting not one, but 2 10 gigabit LAN connections. So dual 10 gigabit LAN along with Wi-Fi 7. There's also 11 USB 3.2 ports and 8 USB 2.0 ports, with a grand total of 12 USB ports on the I/O panel. There's also 3 M.2 slots, 2 of which are 5.0 compliant. So this is a great option for those after dual 10 gigabit LAN, though of course you can add these features in via add-in cards at an additional cost. But just quickly, as an example, you can buy an Intel X540 card for as little as $55 US, though most models start at around $80 US, like the TP-Link TX401. Also, having it integrated into the board means you can use the PCIe slots for adding other devices. Okay, so previously we only had a few MSI boards on hand, and very few were available for $200 US or less. So today we're adding 9 new boards from MSI, starting with the Pro B850-P WiFi, which can now be had for $200 US. This model, unfortunately though, uses discrete MOSFETs from Cinebench. It's a 6-phase configuration, so it won't be the most power efficient in this price range. As for the rest of the features, there are 4 PCIe x 16 slots, 3 M.2 slots, 4 SATA ports, a total of 9 USB 3.2 ports, and 8 USB 2.0 ports, along with Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN. So a pretty weak offering here from MSI, it has to be said. For less money, the Gigabyte B850M Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 6E Ice is better equipped. It may only be a micro ATX motherboard, but still the I/O is much better. For example, whereas the MSI board features just 4 USB 3.2 ports on the I/O panel, the Gigabyte board packs twice as many with 8, and it also includes the same number of USB 2.0 ports. Another MSI board we've managed to get our hands on is the B850M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi, and this is an interesting looking board, with a bit of an unusual design going on here with some green highlights. It's hard to rate the features of this model without knowing the price, so I'll just get to the highlights. There are 2 PCIe x 16 slots, 4 DIMMs, 2 M.2 slots, 4 SATA ports, 11 USB 3.2 ports, 4 USB 2.0 ports, Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN. As for power delivery, MSI has gone with 8 60A power stages for the V-Core on a 6-layer PCB. So a decent but basic design. And just lastly, the primary M.2 slot features a toolless design, but other than that, it's all pretty basic. Now, very confusingly, MSI has another completely different motherboard called the B850M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi 6E. Did you catch that? We just looked at the B850M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi, and now we're checking out the B850M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi 6E. And although the name suggests a change to the Wi-Fi version, it is actually much more than that. In fact, the Wi-Fi 6E version is a completely different product. For starters, the VRM has been massively downgraded using cheap discrete MOSFETs. There's just a single PCIe x16 slot, and while the Wi-Fi has indeed been downgraded from Wi-Fi 7 to Wi-Fi 6E, the wired LAN has also been reduced from 5 gigabit to just 2.5 gigabit. The toolless design features are also gone, and the second M.2 slot doesn't get a heatsink, so the Wi-Fi 6E is a massive downgrade and has no right sharing the Gaming Plus name. MSI really does need to do better than this. Next, we have another unreleased and potentially confusing product, the B850 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. The B850 Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi is already available, but soon there will be a non-Max version, because apparently that's needed, and I'm yet to get pricing information for this non-Max version. The non-Max also doesn't have a product page yet, but I can fill you in on the specs. It receives the same 14 80-amp power stages as the Max version, though instead of 8 layers, it uses a cheaper 6-layer PCB. Also, instead of 3 PCIe x16 slots, there's just 2. One of the M.2 slots has been dropped, so there are 3 in total, and there's less USB 3.2 ports with a total of 9. But the I/O configuration does remain the same, so it's still a pretty solid board overall, though how good it ultimately ends up being will be determined by the price. Now, the Max version of the B850 Tomahawk currently costs $210 US, which seems like a really competitive price for a board of this caliber. There's 2 M.2 PCIe 5.0 slots with another 2 4.0 slots, 3 PCIe x16 slots, 11 possible USB 3.2 ports, Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN. As for power delivery, it's the same 14 80-amp power stages, but this time on an 8-layer PCB, so it's very competitive with Gigabyte's B850 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7 ICE. The MSI B850M Mortar Wi-Fi looks very much like a micro ATX version of the Tomahawk boards, and I'll have to say I'm not opposed to MSI giving it a completely different name, and of course I would rather they do this than give 2 very different products almost the same name. So the Mortar is a fairly expensive B850 micro ATX motherboard priced at $230 US. It packs a dozen 60-amp power stages for the V-core on an 8-layer PCB. There's just a single PCIe x16 slot, though the second x4 slot can accommodate x16 length cards at a reduced bandwidth, of course, but that's generally the case for all of these boards. There's 3 M.2 slots, 4 SATA ports, and a possible dozen USB 3.2 ports, and just 4 USB 2.0 ports. Of course, this model does include Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN. So it is better equipped than the Gigabyte's B850M Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 6E ICE, but at present also costs $40 US more, so you have to carefully weigh up the features. MSI's flagship B850 motherboard is the Edge TI Wi-Fi, which costs a very reasonable $220 US, so less than the Gigabyte B850 AI top, and far less than the Asus ROG Strix B850E gaming Wi-Fi. In terms of features though, it's not nearly as impressive as the AI top. There's just a single 5 gigabit LAN connection, for example, 4 M.2 slots, though the primary slot gets a tool for a heatsink, 3 PCIe x16 slots, 11 USB 3.2 ports, and 8 USB 2.0 ports, along with Wi-Fi 7. Even the I/O configuration isn't that impressive. There are 3 USB Type-C ports, but just 6 USB 3.2 ports in total, with 4 USB 2.0 ports. So while a good quality board overall and probably very competitive given the price, it's also a little lacking in areas such as the I/O configuration. MSI does offer a mini ITX board, the B850i Edge TI Wi-Fi, and this model costs around $290 US, which is less than the models from Asus and Gigabyte. In terms of features, the MSI model is well equipped, packing an impressive 8 90-amp power stage V-core on a 10-layer PCB. There's also 2 M.2 slots, 2 SATA ports, and 9 USB 3.2 ports, along with just 2 USB 2.0 ports. You're also getting Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN. The I/O configuration is similar to the Gigabyte ITX model, with just 6 USB ports on offer here, though all are the 3.2 spec with a single Type-C. MSI also has what looks to be a slightly more powerful VRM on paper, with faster wide network support. And the board is a bit cheaper, so MSI is looking like a strong contender for the best mini ITX B850 motherboard. That said, the board does have one critical flaw: the primary PCIe 5.0 M.2 heatsink, which does feature a fan. It doesn't actually make full contact with the SSD. In fact, despite including a large heatsink with active cooling, as I mentioned, the SSD's controller doesn't receive any cooling at all, as in it doesn't make contact with anything. And funnily enough, the reason for this is because MSI designed it with a fan. Bit of a crazy oversight here. It's hard to imagine how MSI made this mistake. Finally, we have the MSI B850M Power, which is set to cost $260 US. And unlike the other B850 motherboards, this model is geared exclusively towards the overclocking crowd. MSI advertises it as an extreme memory overclocking board with just 2 DIMM slots, so this is probably going to be more fun than anything for overclockers. Anyway, the board comes with a dozen 60A power stages for the V-core on an 8-layer PCB. There's a single PCIe x16 slot, 4 M.2 ports, which is interesting, 2 of which are 5.0 compliant, just 2 SATA ports but 11 USB 3.2 ports and 4 USB 2.0 ports. And there's also Wi-Fi 7 and 5 gigabit LAN. Of course, along with the debug LEDs, you're also getting a debug code, which MSI calls Easy Dashboard. And this external module also includes a clear CMOS, reset and power button. Overall, it's a unique motherboard that you would expect to pass our VRM thermal testing with ease. Sapphire has now released a lineup of B850 motherboards. Unfortunately, I was able to get my hands on a few of these new products, one of which is the Pulse B850M Wi-Fi. I'm not exactly sure on pricing, as the Pulse is yet to go on sale, at least at the time of putting this video together, but I'm expecting it to end up costing around $140 US, and this price makes sense based on its feature set, which I have to say is pretty basic. There's just a single PCIe x16 slot, 4 DIMM slots, 2 M.2 slots, 4 SATA ports, a mere 5 USB 3.2 ports, which is a little bit crazy, I think, 10 USB 2.0 ports though, and then you get Wi-Fi 6 and 2.5 gigabit LAN. So as I said, a very basic motherboard here. The I/O includes 8 USB ports in total, but just 2 of them support USB 3.2 speeds, with the rest being 2.0. As for the VRM, you're getting 7 60A power stages for the V-core, which is perfectly fine, and they're covered by a large heatsink, though there is no pre-installed I/O shield. So if it does indeed become available for $140 US, it will be a decent value offering, I'd say similar to Asrock's B850M ProRS, and cheaper than Asrock's Wi-Fi version of that model. Sapphire has also sent over the pure B850A Wi-Fi 7, a motherboard that at the time of making this video was still yet to receive a product page. This model is expected to retail for around $190 US, and for that you're getting a dozen 55A power stages for the V-core on a 6-layer PCB. 3 PCIe x16 slots, 4 DIMM slots, 3 M.2 ports, 4 SATA ports, 7 USB 3.2 ports, 6 USB 2.0 ports, Wi-Fi 7 and 2.5 gigabit LAN. So it's a decent looking board, but if it does end up costing $190 US, it'll be facing some pretty stiff competition at that price point. Finally, we have the new NZXT N7 B850, a nice simple name for this model, and I have to say I like it. So the N7 is actually manufactured by Asrock, and at this point in time I'm not exactly sure on pricing, but the N7 B850 is a reasonably well-equipped motherboard. The VRM is certainly overkill with 16 80A power stages for the V-core on an 8-layer PCB. There's 3 PCIe x16 slots, 3 M.2 slots, 4 SATA ports, up to a dozen USB 3.2 ports, 8 USB 2.0 ports, Wi-Fi 6E and 2.5 gigabit LAN. So based on that, I suspect it'll cost at least $200 US. And the draw card for this board, of course, is the design. It's a unique looking board that's available in either an all black or white black design, and what makes the model unique is the large shroud that covers most of the board, hiding the components beneath. However, as visually appealing as this might be, the shroud is unfortunately constructed from plastic. And as you're probably aware, plastic isn't very thermally conductive. So covering M.2 SSDs with a plastic strip is certainly not ideal. In fact, I'd say it's detrimental. So I'd only recommend installing slower, lower powered SSDs in the second and third M.2 slots on this particular motherboard, unless you remove the plastic and install a proper heatsink, which I guess somewhat does defeat the purpose of buying this board. Thankfully though, the primary PCIe 5.0 M.2 slot does feature a proper aluminium heatsink, so you could install a high-speed SSD here, but be cautious of doing so in the second and third slot. Unfortunately, the VRM heatsinks are also largely covered in plastic, which is another poor design choice, though the VRM is extreme overkill here, so it probably doesn't really matter. But anyway, a bit of an odd choice here from NZXT, it has to be said. Okay, so time for some testing, and the case used is the Antec Flux Pro, and for recording temperatures I'm using a digital thermometer with K-type thermocouples, and I'll be reporting the peak PCB temperature. Finally, I'm not reporting delta T over ambient, instead I maintain a room temperature of 21 degrees, and to ensure a consistent ambient temperature, a thermocouple is positioned next to the test system. As for the stress test, to create load, I'm using the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X, and the software of choice is Cinebench 2024, which was looped for an hour, at which point I'm reporting the maximum PCB temperature, again recorded using K-type thermocouples. Okay, so first up, here's a look at the VRM temperatures after an hour-long stress test using the 170-watt 9950X. So if the board passes this test, it should be more than capable of handling any AM5 processor, even future yet-to-be-released models, unless AMD goes all Intel 4th gen with the power, but I don't think they'll do that. Anyway, the good news is, of the 47 motherboards tested, the vast majority of them received a pass for this test. There were just a handful of boards that I've highlighted in red that failed due to the power limits, and then a few in orange or yellow, depending on how your screen's calibrated, that didn't perform very well, and I'd avoid as there are much better options for the same price. Starting from the top though, we have the Gigabyte B850 AI top, which peaked at 52 degrees, making it the winner of this testing, though it is a trivial win, as really all these boards need to do here is pass the test without throttling the CPU, and do so while keeping VRM temperatures below 100 degrees, and the majority of the boards tested did exactly that. In fact, over 30 boards passed while keeping the peak VRM temperature below 80 degrees, while a further 5 boards reached over 80 degrees but remained below 90 degrees. Because so many boards passed this test, we might as well just cover the boards that failed, or at least didn't pass our criteria. The Sapphire Pulse B850M Wi-Fi has a 150 watt hard limit, so that is to say you cannot remove the limit, and therefore despite listing support for 170 watt processors, it can't actually provide the full stock performance, which is a little bit concerning. At the 150 watt limit, the board did only peak at 70 degrees, so that's nice and cool, and a bit annoying that Sapphire has this limit given the board should be able to handle 170 watts without a problem. And they also claim that the Pulse B850M Wi-Fi has a robust VRM on the product page, though I guess to their credit they did claim that the board is built for the 9700X and 9800X 3D, though also the 150 watt limit isn't made clear and general Ryzen 7000, 8000 and 9000 series support is claimed. So it's a bit wishy-washy, as is often the case with these board makers. Anyway, I'd avoid the Pulse B850M Wi-Fi as there are other budget boards such as the Asrock B850 Pro A that can handle the 9950X with ease. The next board you should avoid is the MSI Pro B850M Wi-Fi, and this model is much worse than the Sapphire Pulse. For one, it has a 140 watt limit, though it can be removed, but when doing so the VRM temperatures skyrocket to over 120 degrees with the 9950X as the crappy Power discrete MOSFETs struggle with that load, and at least in the case of Sapphire they are using 60 amp power stages. The Gigabyte B850M DS3H also ships with a hard power limit, this time set to 170 watts, which is a lot better, but Gigabyte also claims that the board delivers consistent, high-powered performance to elevate your overclocking to the next level, which is a little bit rich when you have to enable a hard power limit. The entry-level Asrock boards are also hard limited. The B850MA and B850MX both have a 160 watt limit, so again they will work just fine with 120 watt or lower parts, which is most of the Ryzen lineup, it has to be said. So if you're after the absolute cheapest B850 motherboard possible, they might be an option. But for $10 to $20 more, you can get much better boards, such as Asrock's own B850M Pro RS. The Gigabyte B850 Gaming Wi-Fi 6 is another power limited board. This one is capped at 150 watts, so again, there are better boards for the money, and the same applies to the B850M Eagle Wi-Fi 6E, though its power limit is set to 170 watts, but even then it did run very hot. The Asus B850 Max Gaming Wi-Fi W, Asus Prime B850 Plus Wi-Fi, and Asus Prime B850MK, they're not power limited, but they're also kinda bad, peaking at over 100 degrees, while competing boards run considerably cooler. And this is because Asus has gone with cheap discrete MOSFETs for their $150 to $180 US B850 options, which is a little bit insane to me. The Asrock B850 Challenger Wi-Fi, for example, is set to cost $180 US, and it peaked at just 70 degrees without any power limits, and it is a much better equipped board than the Asus B850 Max Gaming Wi-Fi W. Now just quickly, here's a look at how each board performed when running a 10-minute loop test right after the 1-hour stress test. Again, the boards with the orange bars are technically a pass, but they did run excessively hot and therefore aren't very competitive, while the red boards failed the test as they throttled the 9950X, and as a result, the score was lowered. Looking at the boards that don't have orange or red bars associated with them, there is a mere 5% performance variation between the fastest and slowest board, and the run-to-run variance in this test is at least a few percent, so factoring that in, they really are all very similar. Again, I will note that when using a 120 watt or lower processor, all tested boards will enable the same level of performance, as the lowest power limit here is 140 watts, and that's seen on the MSI Pro B850M Wi-Fi. So, as we found in part 1, covering the more affordable B850 motherboards, the good news is there are plenty of good options to choose from. The only real concerns we have right now is whether or not the Asrock thing has been fixed with the X3D CPUs. It's unclear if that problem has been fully addressed or not, and it's difficult to say how common the problem is to begin with, but given it is an ongoing situation and people are reporting problems, I'd only recommend the Asrock AM5 motherboards if you know you're never going to use an X3D CPU. Having said that though, we have had reports that they're killing other CPUs, so it's a real big mess at the moment. Not really sure what we should do with that one. But anyway, just be aware of that, I guess. This is a real shame because Asrock often offers some of the best value boards, and in fact, this is the case for the B850 range. For example, the B850M Pro RS can be had for just $130 US right now, and it works perfectly well, even with the 9950X. It also has a solid feature set, so the X3D issue aside, it's the best value B850 motherboard out there right now. The next best would be the Gigabyte B850M Gaming X Wi-Fi 6E or MSI Pro B850M A Wi-Fi. The Gigabyte board offers excellent VRM performance with a decent feature set, so at $165 US it's certainly reasonable. The MSI Pro B850M A on the other hand costs just slightly more at $170, though it upgrades the wireless networking to Wi-Fi 7, and you also get 5 gigabit LAN and 4 more USB 3.2 ports. Both are good options, but at current pricing, I think MSI has Gigabyte beat here, but of course, again, check pricing in your region. Now, jumping up to around $200, picking the best ATX motherboard, it's a bit tricky, at least based on current pricing. The MSI Pro B850-P Wi-Fi certainly didn't wow me, and for just $10 more, the Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi is a far more impressive product, packing a more robust VRM on an 8-layer PCB rather than 6. There's also an extra M.2 slot, more USB 3.2 ports, and a better I/O configuration. The Tomahawk Max Wi-Fi is also slightly better equipped than the Asus Tough Gaming B850 Plus Wi-Fi, and it's similar to Asrock's B850 Steel Legend Wi-Fi. All three are very good options, but I think MSI is offering the most at this price point with the Tomahawk Max. As for micro ATX boards, at the $200 US price point, there's the Asrock B850M Steel Legend Wi-Fi for $180, though at time of making this video is on sale for $140. Then there's the Gigabyte B850M Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 6E Ice for $190, Asus Tough Gaming B850M Plus Wi-Fi for $210, and then the MSI B850M Mortar Wi-Fi for $230 US. Now, the obvious choice here has to be the discounted Steel Legend, And even if we ignore the possible temporary sale price at $180 US, it's probably still the best deal here, though again, all 4 options are excellent and very competitive in terms of VRM performance and features, so naturally it'll come down to pricing in your region. The MSI B850M Mortar Wi-Fi seems a bit too expensive for what it is, I have to say, though it is the only model to include 5 gigabit LAN, 2 PCIe 5.0 M.2 slots, and it has the most USB 3.2 ports at up to 12, and it also includes Wi-Fi 7 as standard. And I guess it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, the Gigabyte B850M Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 6E ICE is the obvious choice for those of you wanting to do a micro ATX white build. As for the best mini ITX B850 motherboard, this will again come down to pricing in your region, but as it stands, looking at retailers such as Newegg.com for example, the Asrock B850i Lightning Wi-Fi is just unbeatable in terms of value at just $200 US, and it delivers the best VRM thermal performance of all the boards tested, though all 4 options did pass the test with ease. The Asrock B850i Lightning Wi-Fi, MSI MPG B850i Edge TI Wi-Fi, Gigabyte B850i Aorus Pro, and Asus ROG Strix B850i Gaming Wi-Fi all offer 2 M.2 slots, around the same amount of USB 3.2 ports at 7 to 9, and 2 SATA ports. The Asrock model is the only one to include Wi-Fi 6E, while all other models use the latest Wi-Fi 7 standard, and then it's only MSI who offers 5 gigabit LAN, whereas all other models use the slower 2.5 gigabit LAN. So if you require faster than 2.5 gigabit LAN, the MSI model will be the obvious choice, and at $290 US, it's slightly cheaper than the Gigabyte model while having no drawbacks, and much cheaper than the Asus board, which also has no real advantage over the MSI model. So for me, it's really a toss-up between the Asrock Lightning and MSI Edge. It'll really come down to pricing and the features that you require. As for the crazy expensive B850 boards that don't really make sense, because once you start getting up around $300 US, X870E boards become an option, and you get features such as USB 4 as standard. That said, I think the Gigabyte B850 AI Top is the best extreme B850 motherboard, and it kind of makes sense with features like dual 10 gigabit LAN, because to my knowledge, no X870 motherboard offers that. Asrock does have the X870 Taichi Creator for $320 US, and while it does offer 10 gigabit LAN, the second port is limited to 5 gigabit. The Creator does offer an additional M.2 slot though, and 2 USB 4 ports, so that might make it more appealing to you. Either way though, the B850 AI Top is a unique high-end B850 motherboard that does a good enough job of justifying the asking price in my opinion. Anyway, that is going to do it for our B850 motherboard coverage. At least for this year, I can't imagine we'll be returning anytime soon. You've got a lot of boards to pick from. I know there's a couple here and there that we weren't able to get in for testing or they weren't ready in time. Whatever the situation was, we did our best. So there's 47 unique boards to pick from. Hopefully there'll be one there that suits your needs. And that really is going to do it for this content. If you appreciate all the effort we went to gathering these throughout the year, then I guess a thumbs up would be much appreciated. You can also subscribe because we're putting together an updated X870/X870E roundup, hopefully in December. There's a lot of insane boards there. So if you happen to have just a lot of money, you don't know what to do with it, I think that roundup is going to be very interesting for you. There's also the join button on Patreon. You can get access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested, but if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.